Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in tonight. We're going to get started very shortly. So make sure you press the share button. Our state of emergency. We got some great guests coming on tonight. So look forward to this conversation. In the meantime, we're going to count it down to the show. So stay tuned and get ready to tap in. Press that share button. Thank you.
I just want to thank you for taking the time to join us today. We're about to start very shortly. Definitely appreciate you. Please take a moment to press the share button so we can reach as many people as possible during this broadcast. We're going to talk about a very interesting topic, and we want to make sure that as many people get access to this information as possible. So thank you again. Just press the share button and make sure you press a like, you comment, you engage with us. We're going to be sharing all of the comments, as many of them as possible, and your questions and things of that nature. So again, thank you for joining our state of emergency. We will see you shortly. How we doing? Once again, we will be starting very shortly as we come into the last 2 minutes of our countdown. So again, please press the share button. If you have any questions related to the topic, please put them in the comment box. We will get to your questions during the showcase, and we will be starting promptly. So thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to a great show. Thank you.
Yeah, now we bouncing. I like that. Come on, fellas. Plenty of friends and all the Philly steaks you can eat.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Everybody, can everybody hear each other?
Yes.
I'm good.
Yeah, I can hear it.
All right, we are live. The private chat has the actual link if you guys want to share it. Everybody, if you can share it. Just want to make sure we were hearing each other right. So, first of all, thank everyone for coming today. My name is Preston. This is our state of emergency show we host every Sunday night. The show started off as a direct response to kind of controlling the narrative during the George Floyd protests, and it has grown, as we know, to so much more. We start talking about different issues, and today we have a great panel that we have set together, and we have some interesting guests from Wisconsin who's going to talk about the area and talk about what's going on, and we're going to interconnect it with some of the things that's going on in our criminal justice system as well. And I think it's a very important conversation. So make sure you do please share and take the time to tune in. Any questions you have and comments, we will reach out. So before we start, we usually have a resident pastor, but things were going a little hectic. So we'll start off with ask the Dr. Leroy Gasson, our criminal justice professor, if you can start us off with a prayer and get us going today.
Let us say a word. Heavenly Father, again, we come with our head bowed and submission. Thanking you, God, for all you are doing and done for us. And now, God, as we come, we ask you to be in this meeting, we might say something of substance for our people. We ask you protection for all those who are in the battle for righteousness' sake. We pray your protection upon them. These are things we ask in the precious name of Jesus. We pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. So let's start off with introducing our guests. I'll start off because I want to introduce this gentleman at the end a little bit because I want to go into a little bit more. So we have Dr. Leroy Gasson, criminal justice professor, activist in Southeast Queens and all over the country. We have Miss Sheila Warhol from the Guybrush Democratic Club. We have Miss Asia Millette, who is a criminal defense attorney. And we have Mr. Reggie Jackson, who lives in Wisconsin. And I would just like you to tell a little bit about yourself, Mr. Jackson. Tell us a little bit about
thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me on the show. It's just a pleasure to be here with these wonderful guests you have. I am the co-owner and lead trainer for a small consulting firm called Nurturing Diversity Partners. And we travel around the country doing training on race, racism, diversity, equity, inclusion. We work with faith-based organizations, colleges, universities, schools, private entities such as big businesses. We work with municipalities. We do a lot of work in Wisconsin. Most of our work has been in the state because that's where we're based here in Milwaukee. And I'm also a columnist, a senior columnist for an online magazine called the Milwaukee Independent. I've been writing for them for the last 4.5 years. My column has been very well received. I've received 5 awards from the Milwaukee Press Club for my column, including the last 2 years' best written column online. And one other hat that I wear is head griot. And that's a term we use at a museum here in Milwaukee called America's Black Holocaust Museum. I'm one of the griots with the museum. I've been a volunteer with that organization since back in the summer of 2002. The museum was founded back in 1988 by lynching survivor James Cameron. Survived one of the most infamous lynchings in American history in Marion, Indiana, back in 1930. Many people have seen the photograph of his 2 friends, Abe and Tommy, who were murdered with a crowd of smiling whites in the foreground of their photograph, but they don't know that he survived the lynching, and they also don't know that the song Strange Fruit was actually written as a result of someone seeing that photograph. And at the age of 74, this wonderful man started America's Black Holocaust Museum in Milwaukee to document the history of our struggles in this country and all of those people that he called freedom-loving whites that have been with us along the way.
All right, thank you. Asia, can you tell us a little bit about some of the things that you've done? You know, what do you do? A little bit. Give you a little background about yourself.
Well, I'm a criminal defense attorney here in New York. I mainly practice in Brooklyn. Before that, I was doing immigration and also criminal defense out in Nassau County, which is significantly more conservative than Brooklyn and in the city. Except right now, I'm doing mainly criminal defense work in Brooklyn. So we've seen a lot of, what's been happening with the police, what's been happening with the court system. And unfortunately, this is nothing new to me. It's horrible things that I see every day with how my clients are treated, how I'm even treated in court as a Black attorney who's often mistaken for a client or not given the respect as my white counterparts. So happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
All right, thank you. I would like to start this conversation off just to get an idea. I know Mr. Jackson was talking about a lot of things you've been working on. I just wanted to get an idea. What is, we're in New York. Everybody else on the panel is from New York. So, we had a long discussion about things going on in Wisconsin. And just, can you tell us a little bit of like what it's like living in Wisconsin as African American? What are the things, the disparities that you face that we may also be able to relate to?
Well, we in Milwaukee in particular are the poster child for disparities when it comes to Black folks. We only represent about 6.3% of the population of the state of Wisconsin. And most of us live in Southeast Wisconsin. About 70% of Blacks in the state live in the city of Milwaukee. And we're kind of spread out. About 85% of us live in Southeast Wisconsin. So you're probably not familiar with the state, but the city of Kenosha, which has been in the news, obviously, as a result of Jacob Blake being shot, is only about 40 miles south of Milwaukee. And, him being shot by the police officer and the protests that have ensued as a result of that, this is kind of business as usual in Wisconsin. We've had a long history of abuse by the police as a Black community in the state. We had really some cases over the last several years in Milwaukee that really led to a great deal of protest in the city. A lot of the people that went down to Kenosha to support that community were people from Milwaukee that have been actively involved in talking about reforming the police department in Milwaukee. But we've also had major cases in Madison, Wisconsin, which is our state capital. These are things that happen on a regular basis here, and they've been going on here for an extended period of time. We have cases going back to the 50s where a Milwaukee police officer murdered a young Black man by the name of Daniel Bell, planted a knife in his right hand, not knowing that he was left-handed. And it took nearly 20 years before his partner finally confessed that not only did he murder Daniel Bell, but that the police and the district attorney's office helped to cover it up. We had another case in 1981 where a young man who was on his break from a painting job in downtown Milwaukee was taken into custody by Milwaukee police and died in the back of a police paddy wagon, very similar to what happened to Freddie Gray. And it took over 20 years before the family was able to settle a lawsuit with the city. You may have heard the case in 2014 of 31-year-old Dontre Hamilton sleeping in a park bench downtown Milwaukee at a public park. Some white people who worked in a Starbucks called the cops on him. The police showed up, talked to Dontre Hamilton, said, to the people at Starbucks, it's a public park. He's tired. He's taking a nap. He's perfectly within his rights to do that. They left, and these people from Starbucks called the cops again. The same squad showed up the second time and said, why are you wasting our time? This man is not doing anything wrong. Leave us alone. And unfortunately for Dontre Hamilton, the second officer heard the second call. This officer came and poked Dontre Hamilton with his nightstick. Dontre Hamilton woke up. They got into a physical altercation. He took the nightstick from the officer, and then he pulled out his 9mm, shot Dontre Hamilton 14 times, killing him instantly. And those are just a few of the things that have happened. We had a young man who died in a police car in one of our suburbs recently, just a few years ago, in fact, sleeping in a park in the middle of the night, was shot and killed by a Black police officer in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. That same officer has been on the force there for 5 years, and he's killed 3 people. All 3 of them have been Black. So a Black police officer, and they finally took him off the force. They put him on desk duty after a lot of protests out in Wauwatosa. So we have a lot of issues with police in this state, and we've had a very strong group of individuals over a long period of time that have been fighting against, police activity here. So this incident in Kenosha is nothing new to us. These are the types of things we expect to happen because they happen so often in this state.
Wow. That's a very interesting thing. I didn't remember the Starbucks, but I do remember reading about it. It's interesting how it interconnects and things of that nature. Dr. Gadsby, go on, Asia.
Sorry. I just thought it's really sad to hear all of them just told in succession like that. But what you said, something you said was very interesting, how you mentioned the young man who was murdered by the police, and you said that it was both the police and the DA that were in cahoots with covering this up. And I think a lot of times, especially now, we're focusing on the police, defund the police. But at the end of the day, it's the prosecutors as well. The police make arrests, but police don't prosecute people. Police don't bring charges. Police can arrest you for something, but it's up to the prosecutor to continue the case. It's up to them to decide what to charge you with. There are instances where police may charge you with one thing, and then by the time it gets to the DA's office, they're like, this needs to be upgraded. We're going to charge you with something worse. And so I think that's something that we need to remember, that we also need to hold prosecutors accountable so that they can know, okay, if you have information that your police officer is funny, why are you continuing with this case? Why are you not disclosing that to the defense? Why is that not coloring how you view your case, my client, what happens? And I think it's important that we keep that in mind, that there are also these prosecutors that need to go, honestly.
That's absolutely the case here. Folks here have said for many years that the district attorney's office is worse than the police department because there have been multiple cases where police have killed Black people in this community and never been charged. One of the interesting things, now that you bring this up, that I've had conversations with folks at the district attorney's office and the public defender's office, and Milwaukee criminal court actually has a list of police officers who cannot testify in court because they have been shown to perjure themselves on multiple occasions. So they literally have a list of police officers who they know. Now listen, if you're a police officer and you're perjuring yourself in court, you shouldn't be a police officer anymore, right? You should lose your job, but they still have their jobs. And the only thing they've gotten is a little slap on the wrist saying, okay, we won't let you testify in court. So what they did, those officers in Milwaukee, what the police department did, they partnered them, because many of them used to ride around in their patrol cars by themselves. They gave them a partner to be in the car with them. So if there is another incident with that officer, since he can't testify, his partner can testify.
And I imagine it's a rookie, though, that they put with him. So, of course, he's going to go along with whatever the officer is doing.
Right. That is so true. But since we've been dealing with this unfortunate incident in Wisconsin, I did a little research on it, and I was shocked to find so many things that you said, that Wisconsin is the most racially segregated county in this country. That part of the country is the most racially segregated. So everything that you were saying is so true, and it's just compounded. But it all ties into this. With the DA, the police, the sheriff, there's all local elections. And that's what makes it so important. We're so focused on getting this, lack of a better word, human being out of the 1600, that we forget that the local elections are so important too. We will come out maybe in a rush for this, hopefully, but then when it's time for the DA to be elected, the sheriff and those people, we tend to fall back. And the sheriff of Kenosha has been cited many times. I think his name is Pete something, David Beth, I'm sorry. He has been cited repeatedly for his racist profiling actions and words. So from what I understand with the sheriff, because we don't have sheriffs like that in New York, they're voted in. So why is he even still in power? Why is he allowed to still be there when the vote is so powerful? And that's what we have to concentrate on, I think, in order to change anything. Because if we don't change legislation and hold people accountable, then they'll never stop. It'll just be ongoing. We'll be discussing this 20 years from now.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and Wisconsin, all of the counties have their own sheriff that is elected every 4 years. We just elected our first really real black sheriff in Milwaukee. And you may remember David Clark, who I call the Uncle Ruckus of sheriffs. We finally got rid of him, and he finally left Milwaukee. But the sheriff in Kenosha has had a long history of having issues. That community, and our district attorney, usually runs unopposed almost every election. So that is a huge challenge. And I know that because of what happened to Jacob Blake, there has been, a concerted effort in Kenosha to really speak against the sheriff and some of the things that he's done in the past. But listen, we've been here before. This is not something new. We know how difficult that challenge is. Not just getting him out, but getting somebody competent in their place is really, really very difficult.
I can imagine, because it's an uphill battle, but it is the key, though. I really believe that's the key to hold some of these officers, to be able to hold them accountable.
Yeah, and Wisconsin has the highest incarceration rate for black males of any state in the United States, twice the national average. Our incarceration rate, if you include black women, is only exceeded by the state of Oklahoma. So we have a huge issue with a revolving door in our prison system. When people get out of prison here, that period of supervised release that they have, we are the only state that when that clock starts with your supervised release, when you get out of prison, if you are violated during the course of, say you got 2 years of supervised release and you are violated at some point and have to go back to prison, when you get out, that clock restarts for you in Wisconsin. So you could have done, 1 year, 364 days, that 1 day left to get violated, sent back to prison. When you get back out, the clock starts all over in that 2 years for you again. And every year, 3,000 to 4,000 people go to prison in Wisconsin as a result of violations of their supervised release. Not because they were convicted in a court of law due to a crime that they were accused of and convicted, because they violated one of the rules or multiple rules. Most other states will sanction you or give you a fine. Wisconsin will send you back to prison. And we have this revolving door. Our prison population continues to grow because we don't want people to leave and stay gone. We want them to come back.
Yeah, they want them back. Wow, because one of the violations could be something as simple as forgetting to give them a change of address. Am I not correct?
Yeah, there's a set of
back to prison for that. Wow.
Yeah, Wisconsin has a set of at least 18 rules that everybody has to abide by, and then the probation parole agent can add additional rules. But I mean, something as simple as getting a job without permission, moving without permission, getting credit. You're not even allowed to apply for a credit card without permission. Very, very simple things that people would be really surprised to hear that you can't do when you get out of prison in Wisconsin. We have, truth in sentencing, which is passed back in 1999. Former Governor Scott Walker, I'm sure you know a little bit about him. The man who wanted to build a wall between the U.S. and Canada when he was running for president.
Yes.
Right? So that tells you a little bit about Wisconsin, right? But he pushed this truth in sentencing. And I tell people all the time that those truth in sentencing laws that were passed around the country were promoted by the federal government. The federal government literally told states, if you pass a truth in sentencing law, we'll give you more federal dollars for policing and prisons. And so they literally bribed them into passing these laws. And it's had a huge impact here. We have over 3,500 people that are eligible for parole. Their date of release passed years ago, but they won't let them out of prison. The parole commission here has been very inactive for years. The 7 positions they had on it, they only had 3 to 4 people filling those. We went from having an average of about 2,000 people receiving parole a year back in 1999, and 2 years ago it was down to 192.
Oh my goodness.
We don't use the system. We have parole,
horrible.
we don't use it. We have people rotting away in prisons for no apparent reason.
Wow.
That's very interesting. You wanted to tap in, Professor Gasson?
Well, just that, unfortunately, we've seen a lot of these things here in New York State, and we've continued to fight, and now we're on the brink of seeing some change. My history dates back. I'm a former police officer myself, lawyer, civil rights lawyer for the NAACP, and during those years, I had dual role, law enforcement one side. The other side, I was also civil rights doing legal work for the NAACP on these type of incidents. We've testified at all federal and state hearing without stop and frisk, in which we had taken and misinterpreted the Fourth Amendment, and NYPD was stopping people based on race. And we were able to show that and have that law change. Like 4 years back in Nassau County, for the first time in the history of America, which was shocking, we had 2 officers arrested for beating a black teenager. And I was shocked that, here we are. Well, it's 2013, we're talking about the first for abusing black people. We're looking at now with legislation, and it hadn't come easy. One thing that I think we have to be careful of too is that every time the district attorneys, we can't let party politics protect abuse with district attorneys. And that's been one of my major issues over the years in New York City, is that as the council was talking about, we had district attorneys that were complicit. In fact, alone we took 44 cases before the district attorney in Queens, and he dropped the criminal charges, but he would not prosecute officers for abusive behavior. We did the research in courts, and every district attorney in New York City, they would come on that arraignment day and first appear the next day, and they would sit there and they would request a surety, $5,000, $5,000 over $5,000. Well, some people might be a little bit of money, but when you are poor and you can't afford it, that can be $1 million, the same thing. So people were going by the thousands, sitting there waiting. A lot of people took pleas. District attorneys would not bring those cases up to court because it's easy to get a plea. And in the eyes of the law, a conviction, whether it come by plea or you go to a full jury trial, a conviction is a conviction, has the same weight. And so, but it's a whole lot cheaper to get a plea than to go to a trial process. Mm-hmm. And so the district attorneys are very much complicit, and they set the tone. That's why the two things on this, and we had the law, we fought for years, we had the law changed, we had the criminal justice reform package, and what we attacked was the whole bail reform issue. And that was passed. All our police unions went berserk. It's because of the fact that, criminals be running loose in the street, save your sons and daughters. What was happening, though, once in the bail reform, poor people had the opportunity at least to stay out of jail and have a day to raise money and fight their trial if they're guilty or if they're innocent. What our system was doing, we were putting
overcharging people.
I'm sorry, counsel, I didn't hear that.
Overcharging people so that their offenses are now bail eligible.
Yes, we call that overcharging. We should call it stacking the charges. And for those stacking the charges, overcharging, you guys, let's say you commit a misdemeanor, and we're talking about collars for dollars, but officers now charge you with 4 or 5 felonies. You have to see that assistant district attorney before the next morning. You on overtime waiting on him, her. They sit there and they sign off on it. They know good and well. If you look at the penal law book, those charges you cannot prove in court. But as she was saying, so when you get the district attorneys, that says complicit, they should be able to say, you know what? No, these are misdemeanor offenses. This person is entitled to his own reconnaissance bond. However, though, when he or she gets before the judge, now you look at all them 4 or 5 felonies that we're not going to go to trial on, but that's what the bail is being set on. So now that there's certain category you have to give on reconnaissance bail. There is an attempt to get that reversed, and we must fight to stop that because we're talking about thousands of people of color sat in those jails because they could not afford it, and they took plea. If you've been sitting down for 2.5 years and you sitting there, you do not go to trial, forget your speedy right. So trial, forget that does not come into play. Therefore, if you didn't have $5,000 when you were arrested and you've been locked down for 1.5 to 2 years, you definitely don't have it now, okay? So if your family can't afford it, and these things were happening. We finally got an arrest and a conviction with the Gurley case over in Pink Houses, but we were on the City Hall steps demanding, police unfortunately killed this young man. He's walking in the stairwell with a lady friend, and they just killed him. I don't know whether they were scared of him. They saw the black man, but we went over there and there was no sign of crime underfoot in the neighborhood. We talked to people in the building. He just saw a black man and shot and killed him. So we were able to get the district attorney in Brooklyn. He did. We got him to prosecute. We pushed City Hall to terminate. We got him to prosecute the young man, the officer. But at the 9th hour, the district attorney did not recommend penalty. We were like, he need to go to jail. And, but he did not recommend incarceration. So the young man did lose his job. He have a felony record now for killing that young man, but the district attorney did not go the extra step. We wanted incarceration for this, and we see these things over and over again. You're talking about legislation. Definitely, we finally got some. We just got the 50A repeal, where in New York, what they were doing, they would not release the police officers' disciplinary record. And that was in law. That was on civil law in New York State, was 50A. And we finally got that reversed. A lot of pressure on elected officials. And so now every bad officer, his or her history is exposed. So now if an officer coming to somebody's neighborhood, it becomes a liability because we can put pressure on the precinct commander. You need to move him or her out. We do not want him here. But prior to this law, this got passed, 30, 40 days ago, that was not the case. We hid that. It is very difficult to remove bad officers. Somehow in a society, we accept the notion that once you come out of the academy, you have a halo on your head. And that's not true. We all dip our water from the same well. We have bad actors in every profession, from the pulpit to the school to any place you go. The Catholic Church now about to go broke because of the fact of bad actors. The Boy Scouts, the most noted American good old do-good organization, they are declaring bankruptcy because of bad actors. So we do have bad actors in law enforcement. And I think the people have to understand those things happen. And we must be, I think, concentrated on removing the bad actors. Law enforcement, we love it. It's a great profession, but we have to be consistent and persistent in, as I think Sister Walter was talking about accountability, we have to hold bad actors accountable. And same thing, we cannot get caught up in party politics. And I've had numerous fights with some of my elected officials. And the thing I was getting with he's a Democrat. We know we did the Sean Bell lynching here in New York. We were in that court every day. That was such a tragedy of justice. This young man, and for those who don't remember, he was walking, he left the party. His friends in the party were going home at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. Police walk up on them, no identification. They tried to run away, which you would do if somebody present a weapon. And we counted over 50-something bullets in the car. But the Sean Bell case, we went to court. We had testimony from the grand jury where the officer said, he emptied his gun into the car. And they said, what happened? So I saw a figure running down the street. And what you did, I reloaded and started firing at the figure. Okay, wait a minute. He was running down the street, and they asked him 3 times, did you ever see him return fire? He said, no. We went and looked at that street prior, and there were bullets all in the second floor along, Livingston Street with a young man that ran at. That means they were taking headshots. They were shooting up. They were taking headshots. By the grace of God, they didn't hit him in the back several times, not in the head. He survived. But when we heard the verdict, of all the evidence we had, we heard the verdict, the judge said not guilty. The decision was made. There's no way any competent human being could have sat on that trial and come away with a not guilty verdict. But that decision was made prior to the trial ever beginning. That decision was already made. I think people have to be consistent and demand accountability. I think you have to follow the dollar. District attorneys love their job, they love their money. Precinct commanders and captains love their money. But I think, too, what happens, the average citizen feel powerless and hopeless. Mm-hmm. And that's not the case. When you go out here and start telling your precinct commander, hey, look, you must have good officers. If not, you have to go. That makes a difference. When you tell elected officials, guess what? The precinct commander can't police my people right. Then if he don't go, she can't, and then you have to go. But people have to see their power, and they must be organized. I'm so glad, Preston, do these shows. You must be organized, because I've had cases where the police even targeted me one time, and I'm no longer in the business. They've collected an investigation of me, and I'm like, wait a minute. A couple of my clergy people told me about it. Like,
right. I want to ask a question real quick, because I appreciate the information. I want to ask Mr. Jackson. We had when the George Floyd situation happened over here, we had a lot of protests and we had a lot of things going on, but we didn't have any incidents on the scale of what you had following the George Floyd. The whole country was kind of like the world, technically. They were protesting everywhere. So it was kind of like a phase where it kind of calmed down a little bit. But for you guys, the Jacob Blake situation happened, which kind of reignited. So I just wanted to know what was the mood like during this time, and what's the mood like right now in Wisconsin, in different parts of Wisconsin?
Well, the killing of George Floyd, that murder that took place in Minneapolis, which is right next to us across the Mississippi River, that led to protests throughout the state of Wisconsin. There were protests in at least 45 cities in Wisconsin, and those protests have never ended. We've been continuously protesting in Milwaukee, and our suburban communities continue to have protests. It's been a never-ending journey. We actually had a group of activists from here in Milwaukee that made a pilgrimage all the way walking, literally walking all the way from Milwaukee to Washington, D.C., so that they could be there on August 28th for the March on Washington. And on the way there, as they're walking through one county in Indiana, two of them were arrested because they said they were blocking the road, even though they weren't, right? And then when they got to Pennsylvania, they were shot at. A man was shot in the face by a pellet gun. Why this didn't make national news, I don't know, but it should have. But the event with Jacob Blake just simply added to the angst that we already feel, and added to the desire for people here to ramp up the pressure on our state elected officials in particular about police reform. And, one of the other elements that nobody really talks a lot about is the power of the police unions. Our police unions are exceptionally strong here. Back a number of years ago, under Governor Walker, we got rid of the power of public unions to negotiate, right? The only exceptions are the police and fire unions. The teachers unions really got screwed over. And what ends up happening is our police department has a very strong presence in terms of their union. They protect these officers. And I've talked to multiple former police officers, because listen, once they're off the force and their pension is guaranteed, they can talk honestly then, right? They're not going to talk before their pension, right? And they have told me that, the racism in the Milwaukee Police Department is exceptional. And one of the other things that I think we really need to hold police accountable for, and the district attorneys and our elected officials, our mayor, our common council, is listen, we cannot continue to allow a police department that tells citizens when they see a crime that they need to snitch on somebody, but they won't tell the police officers to snitch on each other, right? There is a no snitch rule in the Milwaukee Police Department. I've had multiple officers tell me that, listen, if you snitch, you can forget about having a career as a police officer. We know that this blue wall of silence exists. And I said this to our former police chief multiple times. And I've said this, I'll continue to say this till the day I die. If you want the police departments to have the respect of the community, treat officers who commit crimes the way you treat other people who commit crimes. If Reggie Jackson leaves his house tonight and shoots and kills somebody in front of my house, believe me, my name will be all over the news tonight and tomorrow. Everybody will know who I am, right? And they will charge me the following day, right? But if you're a police officer, it may be weeks or months before you find out the name of the officer that killed somebody. It may be weeks or months before they're charged, if they're charged at all. And this is what you're going to hear from the district attorney's office and whoever's investigating. But we have to make sure we do a thorough investigation to make sure we press the right charges. As if you can amend charges. You amend charges all the time with everybody else. You can amend charges with police officers, just as the attorney shared does. You can charge somebody with anything you want and change it later. It happens every day in our court system, but we constantly hear that same nonsense when it comes to police officers. We had a police officer in Milwaukee just a few months ago that had a house party and choked a man to death, choked a young Latino man, Joel Acevedo, to death at this party. And it took months before they finally decided to charge this police officer who killed a man in his own house, literally choked this man to death in his house. And it took weeks before we found out the officer's identity, and months before they finally charged this officer.
If I can talk about that investigation for a minute. Oh.
Yes, Michelle. Let me see.
Well, I just want to say this one thing quick. I just really want to say this. Part of the huge problem with that is so many problems. The union exactly has it on point. We know in New York, the head of the PBA here is one of the most racist pieces of crap that it can be. But the problem, I think, with the policing, it has to change. And that comes from elected officials with the collective bargaining with the unions to demand certain things. But you have to remember, with police officers, it's not just really about their career when they tell. It's about their life. Because that same man who could choke that Latino man to death, if I'm at his house at that party and I'm a police officer, he can put me either in a compromising position where my life is threatened, or he can kill me. And I think that is the threat behind this not snitching policy in this wall of blue. And what you have to tear that down and not punish the person, the whistleblower, but applaud them and punish the perpetrator. And that's not what is done at this point. I'm sorry, Dr. Gaston.
Absolutely.
That's all right. You always like listening to you. You always have something important to say. But I want to say is that, thank you, the investigation, I've discovered that's a placebo to avoid holding officers accountable. And as a nation, we have to call it out. We're trying to rewrite laws down. What I mean by that placebo, because the investigation, you have the suspect is in your employ, you have the victim is either in the hospital or the morgue or in your jail. Once they're investigating, we've had numerous cases, and I'm sure, I know you're out there too, out there in Wisconsin, numerous cases where the investigation takes longer. Why you want to buy time and start an investigation? The first thing is that you hope that people lose their excitement. They're only excitement for a moment. So you don't want to do an investigation when everybody's raising hell in the streets and you're on the front page. You want to hope that it die down before you do it and release it. The second thing is, yes, there's a blue wall of silence, but in investigation, because officers are dirty too amongst each other.
Oh, yes, they are.
Investigation, you have to now do a perjury-related investigation. And so if I'm involved, I don't know what my people around the corner are saying, you know? And so if I'm going to put, now we're talking about your career and your pension is on the line. Are you going to lie or are you going to tell the truth? As long as we can stall the investigation, you have a less chance of somebody coming in there and telling the truth. And there are officers who would tell the truth if it was under a situation where they were subpoenaed and they were being interrogated on the threat of perjury, which is a crime and a felony. You can lose their job. They will tell the truth. So it behooves law enforcement to stall the investigation as long as possible. And as we move forward, that's why we have to demand investigation. 2 weeks. You have the best trained investigators in the world in your department. Shouldn't take that long. And I think we have to demand that, do not accept that, because that becomes the placebo. Okay, they're taking it seriously. They're going to conduct the investigation. We're going home. We're going to wait for the results. And that wait become months and a year. And also there's the effort too. They have the witnesses. Witnesses might move. Witnesses might die. Witnesses might get arrested. And I've worked in numerous cases. Witnesses get arrested and they're cutting a deal not to testify to see if they're behind. Okay, that happens too. You might have, I've had witnesses that come up when they couldn't get a state license. All of a sudden, they got a state license after they've been disqualified 3 or 4 times. And so the prolonged investigations, you're buying time to try to not do the investigation at all. And we must demand, we must have an expedient investigation.
I completely agree.
Let me just say this. They investigate themselves. Who ever heard of that? What other agency or department investigates himself? I'm so sorry, Colette. Go right ahead. I just had to get that out.
I completely agree. I think that these investigations need to happen expeditiously. I think that the cop needs to make a statement immediately, talking about even the Akai Gurley shooting, how the officer texted his union rep before he even called 911 because he's like, oh crap, I'm in trouble. Let me try to figure out what to do. Okay, now call 911. And these are the things that they're able to do, and not even just the police. Is the fact that the white kid in Kenosha, he was able to go home. Mm-hmm. He went home first.
For weeks.
And on that Rittenhouse too, if you notice, when Tamir Rice had the little toy gun, he was killed. Okay, when the white guy had the weapon of mass destruction of choice by white men, all the police drove by him like helmet white man, go kill somebody. They all rode by him, and it was after that. It was after curfew.
The reason they rode by him was because they knew him. He was out there with them earlier that day getting bottled water from the cops. And they were telling these armed militia members, thank you for helping us out. There's even a video of some of the sheriff's department deputies telling these militia members that, listen, we are going to push some of these protesters your way so you can deal with them, so you can handle them. So it didn't come as a surprise that this young white man murdered 2 people, shot another. It was literally being pointed out by everybody who witnessed it as the police arrived, and they were pointing, he just killed somebody. He just killed somebody. And what did the cops do? This young man is walking with his hands in the air. The universal declaration that I give up. And they drove right past him.
Good job.
They didn't care. They did not care. This kid, not only did he get to go home, drive back to Illinois, across the border to Illinois, his mama drove him.
Yeah.
Why is she not? Why is she not under some investigation?
As
She
an
drove him
accomplice, she's
there,
an
and
accessory.
she drove him back home, knowing that he had killed somebody. And she
It-
drove him back home instead of turning his behind in. She should be facing some charges as well. In my
Aiding and
I got
abetting
a quick question. I got a quick question on that. In regards to carrying guns across street lines, I know you can't just come to New York City
he broke the law
with your gun.
He couldn't.
Are they able to go across straight lines, Illinois to Wisconsin?
He could not legally bring that gun from Illinois at his age. If he was an adult, he could, but he was 17, he's still a minor. He wasn't legally allowed to do that. And somebody mentioned curfew. There was a curfew that night, right? So
Yeah.
he's still out after the curfew. But if you were there protesting against police brutality and it was after curfew, you were getting some tear gas and rubber bullets. But if you were a militia member and you were out there after the curfew started, you were getting some more bottled water because we know how tired you've been.
Isn't that what the sheriff said? He said, well, this wouldn't have happened if these protesters weren't out past the curfew. Well, it wouldn't have happened if he wasn't out past the curfew.
That's what the sheriff said. That's what the sheriff said.
Right. That's what I just said.
This wouldn't have happened if these militia members weren't out past the curfew.
But to me, the most frightening thing about this is that Trump is encouraging these militia, not encouraging, he's sending these militia to these places. And we have to be so careful because what he wants is us to react and to start some type of civil war before this election. And this is what I truly believe, that this is a planning. This last thing with these trucks sitting out there when the white militia guy got killed by the Antifa guy, allegedly. Mm-hmm. How do you have truckloads of Trump caravans sitting there waiting to cause havoc? This is what Trump is sending into our cities, states, and towns where he doesn't like the Democratic mayor or governor. We have to be so very careful about what's going on right now because we can't afford to allow him to catch us in this trap, nor can we allow this to continue to happen. So we're on a slippery slope and we just have to be very aware of what's going on. He is trying to bait us. Make no mistake about that. He is trying to bait us. Absolutely. I just saw what the FOP, which is a Fraternal Order of Police, just came out as a whole and endorsed him. Well, guess what? I'm retired law enforcement. You don't speak for me because I definitely don't endorse him. But he's trying to use scare tactics to get white people that are conservative and on the fence to go his way under law and order. Mm-hmm. He portrayed and he produced all those, excuse my language, coons on his stage at the RNC to say, look, Black people like me. That was not for us because we know the truth. That was to show the white people on the fence, like, okay, there are Black people that like him because he's for law and order. Not all Blacks are against him. He doesn't really hate Blacks. He's not that racist. Look, he has Blacks that like him. So we've got to understand the message he's trying to put out and definitely not believe the hype nor take the bait.
But I think it goes a little deeper when what you say. You have to understand the message. But for a lot of people who haven't dealt with racism in the way, most people think of racism as someone calling you the N-word or things of that nature. They don't understand the language behind racism, the actions that they may do. Like what you're saying with the young man that was able to pass by while they're calling the Black Lives Matter protesters radicals and extremists, changing the messaging on them, and then giving this guy, thank you for coming, this 17-year-old with an AR-15. So it's just like it's mass when people don't really understand what's going on, and everything is moving so fast right now. 2020 has been just the fastest longest year we've ever had, right? So it's just moving at that pace. So I think that we have to really identify, especially talking to a lot of these young people. I think because we do have a lot of engagement with young people in the Black Lives Matter movements and different movements throughout. Because they're not the only movement, but there's a lot of civil rights activism going on right now. But they have to really know, the history of things and how they work, because or else we just repeating the history. They able to they when Trayvon Martin happened, I remember we were marching and what were they doing? They were saying that he had marijuana in his system. You know, this guy was chased down and killed, but they were saying that he had marijuana in the system. I didn't think how that related, but that was all.
There was no correlation.
So
This child, let's make it clear, he was a child.
Yeah.
Yes,
Blaming the
yes,
victim.
yes.
Blaming the victim. It's been a very effective technique for a long period of time. One other thing I want to bring up about what happened to the case of Dontre Hamilton, who was shot after the Starbucks employees called. Now, the officer was fired by the police department. He wasn't fired because he killed Dontre Hamilton, though. The chief said he was fired because he didn't follow the protocol when dealing with a person with mental health issues, which had nothing to do with Dontre Hamilton being sleepy and sleeping on the park bench that day. This is what happened, though, that people around the country don't know. That officer was fired, but before he was fired, because his union is so good, they're like, dude, you better file a disability claim and tell them how stressed out you are about all of this. And guess what happened? He went to court. He didn't get his job back, but he got the disability claim approved, and the citizens of the city of Milwaukee are paying him 75% of his salary to this day. We're still paying him 75% of his salary after he killed Dontre Hamilton.
Wow. So he's making more money because it's not taxed like it was his salary. Isn't that a kid?
Exactly.
That's the reward for killing a black man. That's the reward.
Bravo.
Get this monthly check and move to Florida, enjoy some sunshine, get away from this cold weather.
And let us deal with these thugs, and that's a nice way of the way they call us. But you know what's amazing? When it's a white person that commits a crime, they talk about their future and how they have to protect their future. When a black man or woman commits a crime, everything they've done since the time they were conceived is brought up. Every negative thing of their past. So when it's us, our negative past is brought up. When it's white, they erase that past and talk about, well, you know, we don't want to mess up his future. Like Brock Peters, the guy that raped that young black woman and left her there. They caught him in the act behind some bushes or a garbage can, and he got 6 months because he had a future.
Right. Yeah. They always find a way to change the narrative when it has to do with white people, right? So the crack epidemic, these thugs, these criminals, these crack addicts, these crackheads, whatever they want to call it, right? It's just all about crime and law and order and the crime bill that the feds passed. But now there's this epidemic where there's heroin on the street and cocaine. And guess what? It's affecting white people. So now it's a public health crisis. Now they want to find, okay, well, if they're going to do it anyway, let's find safe places for them to use needles. Let's have a needle exchange. Let's make this safe. Let's give them packs. Let's this, let's that. We have to treat this like a health crisis. So when it's white people being affected, it's always a different narrative. It's always treated differently. It's always talked about differently. When the perpetrator is white, they want to talk about this mental health issues. They want to talk about how he was raised. They want to talk about their future. But then when it's black people, oh, well, you know, back in the day, he got arrested for driving with a suspended license one time, and he must be a bad dude.
Well, that is what happened with that gentleman, the 17-year-old. He has a record. Even at 17, he has quite a few records.
Oh, yeah, he has a record.
Yes, that has to deal with him being combative to police is a part of his record. Like a lot of some of the charges got reduced to disorderly conduct, but it stemmed from him not obeying police directives.
Yeah. Well, this is what happens when murders happen in America. If the murder victim is black, the story in the newspaper is going to be like this long, 3 or 4 sentences. The story about the person that killed them, if they're black, will be about the same distance. If it's a white person that's murdered, you're going to have half the front page covering the victim, and then the other half of the front page covering the person that murdered them. You're going to find out every detail of that person's life. But the only thing you're going to find out about the black person who committed a crime is they're going to pull up his so-called record. Then they're not going to talk to his 3rd grade teacher and ask how wonderful he was in 3rd grade. They're going to pull up the police officer that arrested him 2 years ago because he was driving without a license. So we know how this system works. I have a name for that. I call it the white post welfare system in full effect. It works the same all the time. Listen, we know that these things happen. We see the patterns, and it's unfortunate that white people in this country don't acknowledge that pattern exists. They tell us that we're making stuff up, that systemic racism is a myth, Donald Trump just talked to the Office of Management and Budget, and they passed the memo out to every federal agency telling them they can no longer do diversity training.
That's right. It's
un-American.
Un-American.
Un-American. And then, in addition to that, now that wonderful piece that the New York Times did, the 1619 Project, Trump has attacked that today, and now says that any jurisdiction that's using that, the Department of Education will cut off their funding.
Right.
So they're trying their best. This man is trying his best, and I say that it's not about us. It's about white folks. He's trying to prevent white people from learning and from having the conversations he doesn't want them to have, because guess what? When they learn, they're going to have that conversation with racist old Uncle Bob at the dinner table and say, Uncle Bob, I'm tired of you saying them racist remarks all the time. That's what he's trying to prevent. He's not trying to prevent us from doing anything. He's trying to prevent white folks from being our allies, not just allies who walk around with a Black Lives Matter t-shirt on. I wrote an article recently that said, it's great that you're woke, but are you going to get out of the bed? Waking up
like that.
Get your behind to work. He's trying to prevent white folks from getting out of the bed. That's what he's attempting to do, and he's using race as a tool, because guess what? It's worked before. It worked with Bill Clinton. You remember Bill Clinton?
It worked before that too.
It worked for Nixon. It worked for Reagan. It's going to work for Donald Trump, because we know, and Dr. Gadsden mentioned this. It has nothing to do with party. The Democrats, when Bill Clinton was running for president in 92 and 96, they said, listen, this has been working for the Republicans. We better try it too, this whole law and order thing. And guess what? He was elected twice on a law and order platform, calling black folks super predators. So we can't be tricked into believing it has anything to do with Democrats or Republicans. We understand how the system works because we pay attention. And we have to be very earnest in our efforts to make sure we don't fall into the traps. And they can bring as many Uncle Ruckuses on the stage that they want. Listen, I don't have any respect for those black folks that were on that stage talking about Donald Trump and this and not that. Listen, you speaking for yourself. And just because you are in a position that's advantageous, then that doesn't mean that the rest of us are. It's a lot of black folks that are doing really well, but that doesn't mean, Dr. Gadsden, you know this, just because you're wearing a three-piece suit, brother, does not mean that the police are going to treat you any different than any other black person.
Just a black man in a three-piece suit.
Malcolm X said years ago, what do you call a black man with a PhD? And you know what word he used? The N word.
Yes, he did.
The interesting thing is that I think that in this day and time, the change has to come from us, right? Like how we already know how they're moving, and we can talk about it all day, but we have to start controlling the narrative amongst our own community, making partnerships. Like today is us connected with someone from Wisconsin talking about the plights going on in that community. We need to go a little step further to make sure that we're interconnecting with these different communities, and there's messaging going instead of hearing it from CNN, because they get to direct. If the Jacob Blake situation does not happen, they had already transitioned to black on black crime. They started talking about the black on black crime. And so Jacob Blake brought it back to police brutality, but they're going by the numbers and their ratings, and they're controlling the narrative, and they control the messaging, and that messaging could be harmful to us, so we have to control that message, and we have to control the relationships we have in our own communities and not worry about what they're doing, because it all comes down to us coming together. So I just wanted to tap in on that.
Because like Mr. Jackson said, that behavior has been happening with them over and over and over and over again. So like you say, Preston, they're not going to change. We have to change how we do it. And I just really want to tell a quick story. I know I've been talking a lot tonight, but I'm passionate about these things. The day, this is way before your time, Miss Aisha, but maybe your mom and dad told you this story. There was doing a documentary on my advice. Everyone to see. There was a Black Panther named Fred Hampton. And what Fred Hampton had done was he started getting the poor whites and blacks together. And people were woke. The white folks were getting out their bed. They were listening to Fred Hampton. The FBI went into Fred Hampton's home
and murdered him.
And murdered him and shot his 8-month pregnant wife a plethora of times, but she just happened to survive to tell the tale. The FBI went to his home and murdered him because he was getting the 99% together to say, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. We're fighting each other over race. That's not the big issue. The issue is green and the 1% that controls all the money and the narrative that we get. Because going back to Preston, if you think that CNN, MSNBC, progressive stations are not still controlled by white, rich media, then you're not really listening. So they're still controlling our narrative. No matter how much they say they're liberal, it's only to a certain degree, because when we control our own destiny and narrative, that's when we come out on top. And that's what we're doing now. This is small things, but they're going to bigger things.
You know, on top of that, we cannot, I hear what you're saying. Somehow, thank God for social media, but now we expose it to the world and touch base on what they were saying earlier about this president keeping you divided. If you ever get a chance, someone just go and look at the picture of Fred Hampton door. You talk about Fred Hampton, and when you talk about Breonna Taylor in modern day, you talk about Fred Hampton, 50 years ago, it's amazing how many shots he never had a chance to surrender. But we find in society, whenever somebody speak up and stand out for black causes, you're going to be a target. Yeah. We as black folks cannot add on and be a jury to judge you if you send out people in our cause. I would hope as we use our media, election is coming up. And go back to what attorney was saying earlier about district attorneys. We need to do a litmus test on our district attorneys. What is your plan for prosecuting and locking up innocent black people? And if you can't answer that, then you're unfit to serve. Whether you got one vote, we have to expose that. Same thing, I think now, we about one day from a civil war, and this president is looking for communism. And I don't think a lot of his white supporters understand that when he gets communism overthrow the government, they're going to be excluded too. Dictator have their friends, okay? You're going to be right with us in the same line, but they're so loving, so caught up with hate of black folks, they can't see it. I hope we can expose that to them. But I would hope that we put all these killings, this killing in Mr. Blake, Breonna Taylor, we have to put that at the foot of President Trump. And anybody in our community who's talking they got to decide how to vote. No, when you look at some of these protesters, these militia people, whatever, the right wing, the love Trump people, if you look back in history and saw how the Ku Klux Klan invaded our community and harassed and killed and intimidated us, you have the same picture. You have a bunch of white men on truck with Confederate and American flags, riding, intimidating, harassing, killing, lynching, raping, castrating black folks. This is 70 years later, and we've seen the same thing. We have to put that on the president who has failed to even try to calm and de-escalate the situations. He is encouraged, even when he got the young white lady that got killed 2 years ago in Charlottesville, Virginia, it was this president who said there were some good people there. How can you be good and you killing an innocent young lady? Where's that? All these people that's invading, then in these peaceful protests, they're in violation of federal law because those protesters have a First Amendment right to protest, and anybody that interferes with that is charged with a federal crime. We must put blame, and I agree with you. I was so sick to see those people of color bragging like Mr. Trump. I wanted to ask the question, where's Mr. King? Okay, where's Mr. King? Okay, question. And who killed Mr. King? That's the question. We're not talking about Abel. Who killed Cain? And, those are the questions. But I will hope that all those who have access to any kind of media, social media, talking to your family or friends, please put all this violence at the foot of our president for this next election. He was the one that told police officers when you arrest people, you do not have to be so gentle or that kind. I think he was in Nassau County when he said that. I think you asked Mr. Blake, what's that?
I think he was in Suffolk.
Okay. And he said this. And so they only follow his command. He has not said, how can you go out there as the president? The nation is about to explode, and the president have not said anything to cool it down. You got a black man in the hospital might be paralyzed that was put there by a governmental agent called the police. And you come to town, don't speak to the family, don't speak to the community, do not do anything, ignore that. You basically now telling the police, shoot some more. We cannot let that go unchallenged. And those people who are listening out here, get on your internet, your email, on your phone, every conversation, go to your party, every conversation. Find those black people who's talking that silly stuff about, the president, he's a good man. We eat chicken together. Find those black people and remind them who they are and the threat that's coming to this country. Find those people. And if we don't do that, then we only have ourselves to blame.
You know what you said?
Can I say something about defunding the police? This is what I've been telling people about this whole idea of defunding the police. Back in 1965, the federal government passed a law, which most people have never heard of, called the Law Enforcement Assistance Act, signed by Lyndon Johnson into law just a week after the Voting Rights Act. This was the first time in U.S. history where the federal government was allowed to participate in policing on the state and local level. They were able to give police money. They were able to give states money to build prisons. And that changed the whole dynamics of how we police in this country. So what we ended up doing is over the course of many decades and under many presidents and many members of Congress, we built what I call the army. We talk about 2.2 million people incarcerated in this country. You have 2.3 million people that work for the criminal justice system today. 2.3, wow. That's 1.5 million more than you had in 1969. So when we talk about reform, we have to understand that one of the things that was stopped to fund all this policing back in the 1960s was we stopped the war on poverty. Lyndon Johnson said we're going to fight a war on poverty and gave up on it real quick and transferred that money into policing. So what, to me, the idea of defunding the police has nothing to do with the police. It's about taking that money that we're wasting. The city of Milwaukee, 46% of the city of Milwaukee's budget last year was to pay for the Milwaukee Police Department. 46%. If we were to take those millions of dollars we're wasting on the police and put it into programs to help people with mental health issues, help people with housing issues, help people with all of the issues that people in Milwaukee are dealing with, we would not be seeing something that's really tragic that's happening in Milwaukee and other places. On a normal year, the number of people that are murdered in Milwaukee that's related to domestic violence is typically in the single digits. So far this year, it's 35% of murders in Milwaukee are related to domestic violence. This is something nobody's really talking about. This pandemic, this crisis is dealing a harsh blow to a lot of communities. The rise in people, children as well as women, who are being murdered in domestic violence incidents. A lot of that is related to the fact that we have not funded programs to help people get out of those situations. And as a result, this pandemic is exacerbating these issues. So when we could talk about police all we want, defunding police, all those other things, but what do we do with that money that we save? If we don't put it into the types of programs, and I hate poverty programs. I'm tired of poverty programs because this is what we do. When we build poverty programs, we build programs to help people suffice while they're living in poverty. I want some poverty programs that are going to drag you behind out of poverty. That's what poverty programs we need, because for too long, we've ignored the fact that we stopped fighting the war on poverty. And this is one of the things that Dr. King was all about. The latter years of his life, people forget the Poor People's Campaign, right? Talking about giving people a standard of living. And this is for everybody. Americans across the board, doesn't matter what racial group you belong to, our wages are lower than they were just for inflation than back in the early 70s.
Yes, they are.
We have been victimized by a system that has allowed us to sit back and be silly enough to not even argue that the minimum wage is the same it's been for 11 years. And I don't hear anybody in Congress saying anything about that. 11 years, it's been $7.25 an hour. You work full time, you're gonna make $15,000 a year if you work minimum wage. Nobody's talking about that. Unless we begin to help people overcome poverty and all the things that come with poverty, then all of this other stuff is just irrelevant to me, because policing is going to be what policing is. All of this talk about police reform we've been hearing since George Floyd was murdered. Give me some examples from around the country of real reform that's taking place in policing. Give me some examples. I'm waiting for people to give me some examples, because I haven't been hearing any major. I've heard in Minnesota, oh, we're going to defund the police and replace it with something else. But then when it got to the legislature in Minnesota, what did they do? They punted on it. Oh, we're not going to deal with that right now. The same thing happened in Wisconsin. Our legislature, which is controlled by Republicans because of gerrymandered maps, this is what they did last week. They started a conversation about police reform. And 35 seconds into the conversation, they gabbled out of the conversation.
Wow.
They didn't even talk about it for a minute, and they gabbled out. That's the end of the conversation. So we got to put pressure on not just our community to do things different. And I've been saying this to white folks as I've traveled around the state of Wisconsin, small towns full of white people. If y'all don't get the act together in your community to put pressure on elected officials in your community, there's nothing we can do in Milwaukee, because Milwaukee sends more money to the state government in Wisconsin than any other city by far. But we don't get all that money back. We typically get 75 to 80% of the tax dollars we send to the state, we get back. We get cheated out of money. They give it to other little small communities. And the Republicans in this state have drawn gerrymandered maps, and the Wisconsin Supreme Court has allowed it. The U.S. Supreme Court has allowed it. So there is really no way us in Wisconsin can fight back against the system unless white folks get their act together and stop voting for the type of people that are dividing our state and supporting things that are detrimental to the health of everybody. I want to share with you a story of a man. This shows you how powerful racism is. This guy wrote a book called Dying of Whiteness. And he interviewed people around the country, white people, asked them, why are you supporting politicians and policies that are detrimental to your own health? He interviewed a guy named Trevor in Kentucky. This man is dying of terminal cancer, very rare cancer. He could get treatment if he went to Tennessee, because Tennessee accepted additional money for the Affordable Care Act. Kentucky didn't, so he couldn't get the treatment, right? This man told the author of the book, he said, I would rather die than accept some Obamacare money and be like the rest of these welfare queens.
Wow.
That tells you how powerful racism is. This man is willing to die unnecessarily when he can go across the border to Tennessee and get the treatment. Those are the type of people that we're dealing with. If we don't get something through to those type of people, well, you can't really say nothing to that man. He's just too far gone anyway. But the people that are in his life that influence those folks, if you don't do
children that he's influencing,
then it doesn't matter what you do.
Now, I have a quick question. In terms of the legislators in Wisconsin, how diverse is it? You know, in New York City, we do have some, quite a lot of diversity.
I can tell you this: using the word diverse to define the Wisconsin Senate and Assembly is a misnomer. It's not diverse. You got a handful of black folks, most of them from Milwaukee. It's not many. It's less than 10 out of there's 100 people in the Senate and Assembly in Wisconsin combined, and less than 10 of them are black. Remember, I told you we only make up 6.3% of the population of the state. If it wasn't for Milwaukee, Racine, Kenosha, and Madison, then we wouldn't have any black elected officials. They have no power. They're outnumbered. And they're outnumbered not only party-wise, Democrat versus Republicans, but the Republicans, listen, they won less than 50% of the votes in the last election in Wisconsin, but they won a majority of the seats because of gerrymandered maps. So they have a system that's rigged here. It's rigged. I'm telling you, it's rigged. And we talk about the importance of voting. I say, listen, you can't blame black people for Donald Trump winning Wisconsin in 2016. You can't blame us. People continue to try to blame us. Listen, we 6.3% of the population. 5% of the registered voters are black. What about the other 90, 94, 95% of people? You blaming us instead of them? How can you blame us? And the voter ID law intentionally designed to make sure the black people couldn't vote in this state.
So they have a voter ID. You have a voter ID law in Wisconsin? Yeah,
they passed it. Listen, this is what happened. In 2012 presidential election, when Barack Obama won, the black voter turnout nationwide was the highest in U.S. history. It actually exceeded the white voter turnout for the first time ever, right? And so what happens after that election? State after state after state passed voter ID laws. And they also began to purge voters from the voting rolls across the board around the country, right? So that they couldn't have that happen again. And so what ended up happening in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee County, you had 52,000 less people voted in 2016 than you had in 2012. But it wasn't just because of the voter ID law. There's studies that showed that it impacted maybe 25,000 people, somewhere between 20 and 25. Less people voted because of voter ID. The other thing, and I'll say this till the day I die too, don't tell me that black people need to vote when you can't put a decent candidate on the ballot for them. You got to give us somebody to get excited about. And I'm sorry, I ain't trying to say nothing bad about Joe Biden, but I ain't seen a single Joe Biden bumper sticker on nobody's car. People are not excited about Joe Biden. Come on. Listen, I said this a million times. You have 331 million people in the United States, and these two dudes are the best you could come up with for president? Are you kidding me? Come on, man.
Mr. Jackson, I hear you loud and clear, but since you went there, I wish you could just take a second. What I'm discovering, a lot of people still don't understand the purge law. So since you brought it up, I'm going to ask you to explain it, sir, so everybody would know about this purge law that was passed.
Yeah. Every state has different rules. So in Wisconsin, the way it works here is that if you voted in the past, you registered to vote, right? If you don't vote in a certain number of elections, they will take your name off the voting rolls, right? In addition to that, another rule they have in place is if this is what Wisconsin did last year. They sent out letters to all registered voters in Wisconsin telling them that we're verifying that you still live at the same address. Because if you register at one address and then you go to vote, but you have a different address, you can't vote, right? Unless you re-register ahead of time. So what happens last year, they sent out letters to 230,000 Wisconsinites telling them that their names would be purged from the voting rolls because their current address doesn't match their address now, or the one that they registered under. And this is how they think about this. You send, let's just say, Attorney Millette. They send you a letter in the mail, right? And they're saying, we're just checking to make sure you still at that same address, right? You don't reply to that letter. So they say, because you didn't reply to that letter, which you probably thought was junk mail anyway, we are going to assume that you live somewhere else. And so what happens is these 230,000 folks in Wisconsin got these letters. Many did reply to them, right? So they said, we're going to purge your names from the voting rolls. This is what should have happened. If I send, a letter saying that I'm checking to see if you're at that address, and we've had a company that we paid to check to see if you registered a car or something else at a different address, why not send a letter to both addresses?
Right.
Yeah.
I registered this car at this other address instead of one that I registered to vote under, and you verified that I registered the car at this other address. Why are you sending mail to the address that you don't think I'm at anymore? You're doing it intentionally to make sure that those people would never know that their names are being purged. And it took a concerted effort by people across the state to go out and reach those people whose names were on that list. And that list has gone from 230,000 people being purged down to now about 100,000 that they still haven't been able to get in contact with. And we have a huge issue in Milwaukee with people being evicted from their homes and being, just very mobile, moving from home to home, trying to find a place. So some of those people you're never going to find anyway. They're not going to be eligible to vote. They're going to go to vote in November, and they're going to find out that they're not eligible to vote. And they've been doing this in state after state. They did it before the 2000 election in Florida. We talked about the Gore lost by 538 votes in Florida, right? It wasn't because of anything other than the fact that they purged people. Because this is what they did. They found people that have a felony conviction. In Wisconsin, if you have a felony conviction and you're still on paper, you're still on supervised release, you can't vote in Wisconsin. So if you've been released from supervised release after you get out of prison, you can legally vote. But people don't know that. They think if you have a felony conviction in Wisconsin, you can't vote at all. Some states you can, right? So this is what happens. They look through the voting rolls in several states, and they said, okay, well, here's Reggie Jackson, and he has a felony conviction. We're going to erase his name from the voting rolls. But it wasn't the right Reggie Jackson. It's some other Reggie Jackson, some bootleg Reggie Jackson, because I was getting told that, it's some Reggie Jackson that's got some stuff going on with his credit, and they calling me, asking me to pay this man's bills. I'm like, you got the wrong Reggie Jackson. You need to call this other brother, not me, right? So what happens is people's names were taken off the voting rolls around the country. They didn't know it because a person with the same name as them, different address, different social security number, different date of birth, your name was the same as their name. That's all it took for them to purge your name for the voting list. And this is a major problem across the country. People don't understand that this is one of the tools to help the Republicans win elections, not just the presidential election, but state and local elections.
Yeah, the state and local ones. That
has worked tremendously well for them. And they're not going to stop using these tools. I tell people that, listen, you can talk about the tools that are being used and we can change this, that, and the other. They are not getting rid of a law that's a Jim Crow law that's still in existence. The one Jim Crow law that's still on the books that nobody realized the Jim Crow law, felon disenfranchisement laws, were all written during Jim Crow time to intentionally disenfranchise Black men, right? All of those laws are still on the books. They haven't getting rid of the single one. We're talking about Jim Crow is dead. Jim Crow is alive and well.
Fine well.
And that's of Black adults can't vote due to a felony conviction on their records. And listen, what Florida did, Oh, the residents were asked, should we give felons the right to vote again? And the residents overwhelmingly said yes. But what did the legislature in Florida do? Say, oh well, we can't overturn what the residents want. But if you still owe some fines or court costs, you can't
Right.
vote until you pay those off.
Yeah.
So it's a poll tax. It's a new version of the poll tax.
Right.
And whatever you come up with to fix it, they're going to come up with a new solution to mitigate what you're trying to do to fix the problem. It's a constant struggle that never ends.
Never. And I heard that Trump is trying to classify all protesters that get arrested as felons.
Mm-hmm.
They're charging protesters with federal crimes.
As a felon,
It's I thought in Kentucky they were trying to change it so that if you're staying on public property, you're essentially trespassing, that they make that a felony, and if you're convicted of that, then you can't vote.
Yep.
Wow.
They're always it's a diabolical plot to constantly find ways to keep us down and downtrodden. And that's why we have to change our behavior to work around them, because we can defeat them. We're smarter than them, but we keep falling for the same old song.
I want to say what's interesting today that I've learned about, first of all, is the fact that, if you're not experiencing something, you don't know what's going on, right? So just to hear what's going on in Wisconsin, to me, is like eye-opening, because, we look at some of the things we're dealing with, but to hear some of the things you guys are dealing with, it's just like, it's on another level, but it's still in the same essence, like we're all going through the same thing. And I think that conversation has to happen more often, where we kind of find the interconnections where we can say, listen, we're both going through this, right? And I think it's very important that we start connecting with different communities, because we can start addressing it. I think, like you said, there's a lot of laws on the books, but there's a lot of things to keep us from connecting, from uniting. And if we actually got connected and got together, that's a whole different program. Because we say, hold up, you want to do that too? And I don't think, if I'm in New York City, if I'm going through my stress in life, I'm not really thinking about what's going on in Newark, New Jersey, even though it's right across the water from me, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not thinking about what's going on in Milwaukee. I'm not thinking about what's going on in Orlando or Houston, Texas. Like, we all think we're just going through our own struggles and stuff like that, but we're all kind of going through the same thing. There's a whole system that's designed to keep us there, and we have to find a way to, just find a way to connect, because I think once we hear that enough, we can start doing things. We need to start making noise. And going to what Dr. Gassi said about the finances, I've been big on this. I put posters. Sometimes people they don't like. Man, stop supporting the companies that are funding this presidency, because you're basically helping fund Donald Trump. So when this company, if their CEO or their owner is supporting, he's using the monies that you bought from that Wendy's or that Burger King, right, to go into to take that PAC money and put in $100,000 into this guy's campaign, right? So if we keep funding the opposition, then we're always going to be at the losing step. We have to fund the people that are actually helping our community, who are actually on our side. And I think that's something we have to really pay attention to as well. Is where's that money going, and who we giving the money to? Because you could love McDonald's. I'm not saying I don't know which companies is which, but you could love McDonald's. But if you love McDonald's is supporting the president that's gonna put you in, why even shop there at all? And I'm not saying McDonald's is one of them. I'm just saying, because I don't know exactly the list. I don't have that off the top of my head. But we need to look at that, because the economics of things is very different. Because even for like Wisconsin, that could make a big difference. Just in even at 6%, if that money changes, Swift, trust me, they start changing, because capitalism is king in this country. So
also, we are the biggest consumers. We are huge consumers.
Stop supporting the sports teams whose owners are in support of these policies too.
Good point.
Sports teams whose owners are in support of this foolishness as well. Listen, I have some cousins. They love the Dallas Cowboys. Listen, I grew up watching the Cowboys, and they were some of my favorite teams when the Packers were horrible, right? So I used to like the Cowboys. But I'm sorry, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys telling his players, we got to think about how we're going to allow you to protest. This ain't a plantation in Mississippi. Who are you telling what to do? And let me tell y'all what my nickname for Wisconsin is, if y'all don't know this already. Listen, I was born in Mississippi, moved here when I was 7 years old, and I often refer to this state as Mississippi. That's what
Wow.
Wisconsin is. It's
And
Mississippi.
you know,
It's Mississippi North.
and I think we are, as you were saying earlier, as Mr. Jackson, we are bound. We have the same issues, and I hope nationwide we will see that. The same kind of killing, police brutality that's happening down there in Illinois and Wisconsin, we have the same thing here. This has been the moment that the world has risen up and said this needs to stop. But we've had the same thing here. I don't think any black person can think that they are safe, whether you have 4 or 5 degrees, athlete, comedian, etc. There's no black man or woman safe in America from police brutality. So we all bounded by that. I would hope that, and he brought up the purge issue that we've been trying to educate people on. And we would say that everybody that's listening out there, please check with your neighbors, relatives, friends, and family, girlfriend, boyfriend, and see have they heard any message or information from the Board of Election in the past 6 months. If they have not received any information, then it's highly possible or probable that they have been removed and purged from the list. Well, how do you resolve that? That's a very good question. Simply go back and register to vote tomorrow, or Tuesday, because tomorrow's a holiday. Just go register to vote, and you are back on the list. That's the first way to resolve that. Also, I think we have to listen to this president. I will have my legal observers out on election day. What happens, like you said, Brother Gibson, like you in Mississippi, we in Mississippi and Alabama also, up north, beyond
Yeah.
same thing. We will have our people out because the president, and I don't know if you've been listening, has been calling out that he wants sheriff's department and law enforcement officials to patrol election sites on election day. As one of y'all was saying earlier, the president knows what he's saying when he called these little sidebar conversation out. They're with law enforcement in their official capacity or their unofficial capacity that will be at polling site to deter black people. And we will hope those who see that, you should immediately call your local police. That is illegal. That is a violation of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, because that's involved in activity that would discourage or prevent black people from voting. You got to raise hell. Our clergy, our pastors, community organization, when you see that in your community, you got to raise hell. That officer can't sit there in a police car. She can be inside to protect the site, but they cannot come there and engage. And we've had that here in Southeast Queens over the years. So therefore, we cannot be waiting and wonder what happened after election day. Do not let the president get away with that nationwide of sending these law enforcement officials to the polling site, because he knows what he's doing.
Yes.
We're closing in on time, and we got about 2 minutes left. I do want to make a statement real quick, but before I go, I just want to thank everybody. Thank you, Mr. Jackson, Professor Gatson, Ms. Warhol, Ms. Asia Millette. We appreciate you, all for joining us today. I think this was an eye opener for me, and I'm appreciative. I want to make 2 announcements. One is if you haven't joined SEQ Legal is a group that we created. We have a lot of attorneys on board that are helping you with get a legal advice, helping direct you in the direction you need to go as far as getting legal advice and what you can and can't do and what you need to do on all legal matters. So you have some people that may do something with a discount, some may do pro bono, some work in the state, city governments. We have people from all over. So if you just come in, tap in, join the group. If you have any legal questions, just ask, and someone will connect you, and then they can help direct you. That's one. And we are going to have we're going to announce this week, we are having a free virtual legal clinic this month. So that is going to be a big thing. We're going to announce it on Tuesday on the date and everything that's going on. So we definitely want you to tune in. If you have anything, you can join us on that day. We'll create a post for that. So again, I want to thank everybody for coming in. Follow us, P Baker NYC, on Twitter. We're on YouTube now. This is experimental. We usually use Zoom, so we open up the door. So if you saw me looking around, I was trying. First off, we had another guest that she wasn't able to get on, so I was trying to help her get on, but it didn't happen. And but now working with Twitter and YouTube is a little bit different. So when you're working with multiple platforms, and as you can see, there's no tech guy running around behind me. So I'm the tech guy for this thing too. So again, thank you, Mr. Jackson. If you any last words, I would like to leave it with you. or anything you're working on, or how people can connect with you as well. And I'm gonna leave everybody's tag after this thing. I'll post it.
Yeah, well, they can read my column at MilwaukeeIndependent.com. Just go to that website and then just type in my name in the search bar, and I write articles constantly. I've been writing for the last 5 years for Milwaukee Independent. You can also find me at my website, nurturingdiversity.us. We provide services, diversity, equity, inclusion services. We've been doing all of our work virtually since back in March. We've done work with people across the country in multiple states, and we're willing to bring our expertise. So one of the tools that we use is really historical literacy. We want to teach you the things you didn't learn in history class, so you can have productive conversations about what's going on in this country. And I really want to just thank you, Preston, for reaching out to me and this panel. Listen, I think I told you this, Preston, man. Every time I meet people from New York, I just fall in love with New York folks. I don't know what it is about y'all, but I'm telling you, y'all got it going on in New York. And it's been a pleasure getting to spend this little bit of time with you all tonight. Hope to connect with you all moving forward. And whenever it's safe for me to travel again, my wife and I plan to make a trip to New York. I've been there a couple of times. She hasn't been. But man, we gotta
bring you to Southeast Queens.
Yeah, we
gotta give you a nice dinner.
Yeah, absolutely. Home cooked meals are always my favorite.
We're gonna take you out to a nice black-owned restaurant.
All right,
we got a few. Anyone else want to say anything before we go? We're gonna.
No, but I want Mr. Jackson, just on closing, to tell us that little anecdote you did in the beginning to Reverend Gaston and I about the fence. I think that was so great.
Oh yeah. So my mentor James Cameron, the founder of America's Black Holocaust Museum, told me that if you look at your hand like this, if you slap somebody with this hand, it's gonna hurt. But if you bring those fingers together and you punch them like this, it's way more powerful. We're way more powerful like this than like this. This is where too many of us are in our community. It's time for us to come together like this. We have way more power. And Frederick Douglass told us years ago, power concedes nothing without a struggle. We better make sure the struggle continues.
Yes.
Amen.
Yeah,
Amen.
And Mr. Jackson, anything we can be supportive of you out there, as your struggles, please let us know. Preston, I know have your contact. And second, everybody out there, it's an honor to meet you, sir. Everyone out there that's listening, we are, my organization, Alliance for African American Awareness, we are training observers to be on our polling sites on election day. So if anybody interested, please give us a call. The training will take about 45 minutes to an hour. We're going to have refreshments and stuff, put you out there on election day. And we put in that social distance, so we're not going to put anybody in harm's way. And we'll have eyes and ears out on election day if anybody want to be a part.
All right. AJ, you have anything on the way out? Miss Millette?
I'm just happy to be able to speak with all these amazing people. I just reiterate a lot of the things we said about, being vigilant. I'm happy that we now have platforms like this, like social media, where we're able to have these discussions, where we're able to learn about things that have happened that we don't necessarily know about. And I know these are closing remarks and not to go back into anything, but I just found it incredibly crazy is probably the best word that I can come up with. That I didn't know that the police bombed a whole block in Philadelphia in the 1980s when they believed that, trying to attack a group of what they claimed were Black militant radical people. And I didn't know that until I was in college. Never heard about it. I was born in 1990. This happened 5 years before I was born. Never heard about it until I was in college. So I'm very grateful and happy that we have platforms like this. We have social media now so that we can be our own journalists, because we can't always rely on the media, the mainstream media, like Mr. Jackson said about the group of people who were marching to Washington, and how all of this that happened to them didn't make mainstream media, but we can make our own media. So thank you for this. Thank you for allowing me to be here to discuss these very important issues.
Yes. Thank you guys again. And on Asia's note, I would like to say, don't let them tell you any of our groups are radical groups and dissuade you from supporting the groups. You don't have to be a part of every organization, but we don't have to downplay any organization. We're all fighting for the same cause, and there's room for all of us. So you have Black Lives Matter, you have National Action Network, you have Rainbow Coalitions, you have NAACPs, and you have a lot of new groups that have come up. But we don't need to knock down any one of these groups. Let's just support all of them. And if you want to be a part of one group, you don't have to knock down the other group. We are one fight. We're working on one fight, the same fight. And that's just to help us have a better position in society. So thank you guys again. I appreciate you.
Can I share one last resource? Can I share one last resource real quick?
Y'all don't want to leave.
America's Black Holocaust Museum website. You can go to the website. It's abhmuseum.org. We have a breaking news section there where we literally take news from Black news sources around the country, and we put that blog together. So a lot of great stories there for you to find out what's going on in Black America in one place.
I'm gonna get some of those. I'm gonna get your websites from you so I can reshare all that information too,
Right.
so everybody can have access to it. And Miss Shirley, you want to say something?
Really, really quick, I just wanted to say on behalf of the Guy Arbor United Democratic Club, as always, we are assisting and helping our constituents get to the ballot box on the election day and for many more things. So please follow our page on YouTube or Facebook. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Preston. Love you. And it was so great meeting you, Mr. Jackson.